You may get a car come into your shop and it's got codes for a crank angle sensor, a knock sensor, and maybe even a coil. But related to those is a misfire code. It may be tempting just to swap parts on the vehicle to see if it solves the problem, but what you need to do is actually go and test out the situation to find out what parts are really defective. The thing to remember about these codes for these sensors is it's part of a whole ecosystem on the engine that is designed to preserve the internals of the engine against knocking, detonation, and pre-ignition. If there's an issue with one sensor, it may cause a code for another. If there's a faulty coil, it could cause codes for a knock sensor or even a crank angle sensor. It's important that you test the components individually and hopefully isolate them for the issue that may be going wrong with the engine. I know that I said ecosystem before, but really think about it. These components help to preserve the engine and also the catalyst. In other words, they're preventing knocking, pinging, detonation, and pre-ignition on an engine. These can be particularly damaging to the piston, the combustion chamber, and also the insides of the emission system. So let's do a little scenario and a little thought about this. The crank angle sensor, it measures where the crankshaft is in relationship to the intake valves and also the exhaust valves. And it's expecting a certain combustion moment to happen at a certain time to change the speed of the crankshaft. The knock sensor, it's listening to what's going on inside the block to measure when that combustion event happens. If the ignition coil is not firing or cannot create a full spark, well, it's going to cause a misfire. So all three of these components are related. And to solve an issue with a misfire code or codes related to these components, you need to diagnose all three at the same time. If you need to diagnose a crank angle sensor, well, a scope is your best friend. This way, you're not only testing the sensor itself, but you're also testing the reluctor wheel on the crankshaft. To test a knock sensor, well, you got to understand these are piezoelectric, and they actually generate an AC voltage that is picked up by the ECU on the engine. You can easily test this with your scope or even a voltmeter. When testing a coil, make sure that you're using a scan tool first. Look at the misfire counter. This way you can isolate which cylinder is having the most trouble. Also, use the scope. Look at the primary ignition pattern and also the secondary ignition pattern. The secondary is going to give you an idea of what's going on inside the cylinder. If you're dealing with a vehicle that has codes for misfires and particularly sensors on the engine for the crankshaft position sensor or the knock sensor or even the coils, make sure you're fully investigating the problem. Do not swap parts on these vehicles because it's very expensive, not only for the customer, but for your reputation. I'm Andrew Markel. Thank you very much.